How are you doing?
Well, we're both Jets fans of a different type, and we have different reasons to think about the Jets that we are fans of for different type reasons. Today, for me, it's optimism. Today, I don't know for you, is it optimism for the football Jets or no?
Yeah, so I'm wearing my Jets hat. I've been a Jets fan pretty much my entire life. I was born out on Long Island, went to games at Shea,
Oh wow.
have also gone to games at Giant Stadium, and I've not been to a game at MetLife yet, but I'll get out there at some point in time. And for those of you who don't know, earlier today, Robert Saleh, the head coach of the New York Jets, was let go, was fired, he was terminated. He lost his job, and the Jets are a dumpster fire. They are a dumpster fire because of culture challenges inside their business. And actually, I would say lack of culture inside their business. And I would also say that lack of culture inside their business is a result of poor leadership and consistent changes at a leadership level inside the organization. And I posted on Twitter about this a little bit earlier today where I had a little bit of fun. I said, hey, I'm a Jets fan and I'm somewhat of a leadership expert. Ask me anything. And one of my friends responded back and said, who's leading the team? And I said, there's a void. So anyhow, I thought I'd have a little bit of fun today with the Jets hat on. Tim and I were talking about leadership, specifically the idea of fractional leadership. And Tim went and said that he's excited primarily. So to provide you a little bit of backstory, Tim is a Winnipeg Jets fan, a
Mm.
Winnipeg Jets fan. So they have reason to be optimistic because the NHL season is starting now. So Tim, what are you excited about as far as the Winnipeg Jets?
To be honest, um, so what am I excited about for right now? I'm actually probably going to their first game tomorrow night because it's in Edmonton, which is the closest NHL city to me. To be honest with you, I have purposely not allowed myself to get excited about anything, right? And it's not, and it's because if you were to ask all the experts about the Winnipeg Jets this year, they're all expecting regression, right? And so, all right, let them have it. They can. I will temper my expectations accordingly, and if they regress, then I will not be disappointed. But a lot of times, when they are expected to regress, they come out and they start leading the conference during the regular season. I mean, you and I both know, and listeners who listen to this and like hockey will know that it has never resulted in getting out of the first round of the playoffs or having that extra gear that you need in the playoffs. That's what they need to do. But the reality is that when people suggest they're going to regress, they typically do very well. When people suggest that they are going to do very well, they typically regress. So I am perfectly happy having zero expectations this year.
So just for clarity, you are a fan of a team who
Mhm.
has never made it out of the first round of the playoffs.
That's not true. That's not true. In 2018, went to the conference final.
When, man,
And in 1985, they beat the Flames in the first round.
2018 made it to the conference final.
Yeah.
So, all right.
They lost to Las Vegas.
We won't edit that out. That's just a miss on my end. There was a period of time before 2018 where he didn't make it out of the first round of the playoffs,
Uh,
even with the whiteout and the move to Arizona and the rebuild of a team and all of that other kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, well, that's not entirely true either. They did beat the Calgary Flames one year in the 80s to get out of the first round.
Did they really?
Once.
See, look at this. Sometimes you have your own biases, and these biases create stories that sit in your head, and it takes someone to either punch you in the face, ask you a question, make a comment that will bring you back to the right side of things and shift perspective. So we're not going to talk about punching people in the face today, even though I already said that
Oh,
once.
man.
Let's talk a bit about leadership and
Sure.
let's have a little bit of fun with the Jets.
Okay.
You do not have to be a football fan or a hockey fan to enjoy or get perspective out of this conversation. I That is my commitment. You do not have to be a hockey fan or a football fan. You could be a hockey fan, you could be a football fan, you could be a golf fan, you could be a fan of band, you could be a fan of any operating environment where leadership is a requirement. Tim, can you think of any operating environment where leadership is not a requirement?
We should honestly just sit here in an awkward silent pause for 5 minutes thinking about this just to prove a point. But the answer is no. I mean, leadership is required, even if you're not a leader on paper in the sense of where you sit in an org chart. Every single person is required to be a leader in their life, whether they choose to or not. Often dictates where they go. But
So, what's your definition of leadership? How do you define leadership?
well, leadership is pretty simple. It's a state of being, right? It's the ability to take the lead on something. And I think people underestimate just the simple fact that everybody is required to be a leader in some way, shape, or form, no matter what you do. Um, anytime that you choose to take initiative or take the lead on something, you are choosing to lead. Yeah, I think about one of our fellow mentors, Lee Cockrell, would say it best. It doesn't matter who you are in the company, you have to be a good leader. You can be the person that is managing the restaurant and you have to lead. But you could be the person who is serving tables in the restaurant. You need to lead because you are the people in that restaurant are looking to you to take leadership on their experience, to show leadership in their experience. They're trusting you with it. And I think every single person must lead in some way, shape, or form. They're being looked to lead over something.
So, what is it? So, you've said leadership and lead, and you did the thing that I remember my school teachers used to tell me: you could not define something by using a version of the word in the definition. So, what does it mean to lead?
Well, I mean, I think hmm, this is good. Yeah,
Tim is sighing at me. If you're not watching the video, Tim, I told him we were going to have a little bit of fun today, and Tim said he was ready to bring it. So we're going to push buttons all the way through. So again, let's have a little bit more fun with this whole thing. What does it mean to lead?
You never said it would be at my expense, but anyway,
it's not your expense.
I know, I'm just teasing you, but what does it mean to lead? And the reason why I'm sighing and hemming and hawing is because it's like, well, it really depends on who you ask, doesn't it? Ask them to define leadership. But to lead really just means to be the leader, the first mover, the one who shows initiative, the one who takes steps, the one that moves, right? Others might lead behind you, and in many ways, the person who follows that leader first is more important than the leader themselves because it shows that there's credibility. But really, the leader is the one who's going to take that first step on behalf of themselves or a group of people to accomplish something.
It's taken me a while to create this definition. Tim didn't ask me what my definition of leadership is, so I'm going to go ahead and share it because I know that was the next question that was out there. My definition of leadership is how we move forward.
Yes.
Very simple. How we move forward. How we move forward. And Tim hit on a couple of those points in his definition of what it means to lead. It's movement. It's forward. Now, forward changes depending on the objective that you're moving toward. Forward could be driving north. Forward could also be driving south.
Totally.
The challenge happens when new leaders come in and attempt to turn organizations around and then have to turn those organizations around multiple times. And before you know it, you don't know if you're going north, you're going south, you're going east, you're going west, or which direction you're going to. So there are leaders who are ordained or brought into an organization, given the role, the title of leadership. And unfortunately, they may be lost relative to the direction that they're going or the objective that they're looking to accomplish. Tim, is that fair?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So why do people get lost? Why do people struggle with direction, and I'm not talking about, heck, we can talk about physical direction and we can talk about organization direction. They all relate to each other because we're still dealing with the same wetware. We're dealing with human beings inside organizations, human beings that interact with other human beings. Why do people struggle with direction?
Well, I mean, where do you start, right? It's like, why do people struggle with direction? There are any number of reasons, really. I mean, it could just be they don't know what the problem is, right? They might see symptoms of the problem and think that they're attacking, but they might not really know, right, what the problem truly is. They might be intimidated by the work that it creates, right, or that solving the problem would require. They could be.
Hey, Tim, as a leader, you don't have to do this alone. Like, you can ask questions back. This is a conversational podcast. So it's funny because I'm watching Tim's nonverbal, and Tim's nonverbal is he's just kind of like grasping at each of these instances because he doesn't know what questions are coming or what direction we're going into, which is a lack of leadership on my end, a failure to lead on my end to provide a specific direction. Even though before we started talking, we said, hey, what do we want to do from a learn, convey a piece of information, think, reflect, and then take action. We talked about that. Now I'm going off script and shifting things around to get back to the point that we originally were going to talk about, which gets into this discussion around fractional leadership. But this direction piece. So one of the things I think people struggle with on the direction side of things, and John Boyd talks about this in the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. We forget to orient ourselves relative to the things, the environment that we're in. So we miss on observation.
Mm-hmm.
We fail to orient ourselves, see ourselves in that context. And if we don't observe properly or orient ourselves properly, how could we ever make an effective decision to move forward in a specific direction? And then if we can't make a decision, then we miss on the action. We fail to act. And I think one of the things that was Robert Saleh's undoing from a Jets perspective, if anybody watched the game over the weekend, and again, I said you don't need to be a Jets fan or a football fan or a hockey fan to take something out of this. There was a decision that was made in the middle of the game, early on in the game, that did not align with the identity that I believe the Jets have as a team. And I do think they're lacking identity, but one of the identities the Jets have as a team is a very strong defense. They're a defensive-minded team. They are built to stop the pass and sometimes stop the run, but really built to stop the pass. So this vertical game, they're built to stop it. Well, Saleh was not forced. He had a decision to make. It was 4th and 2. They were unable to move the ball on the offensive side, and they were in the Vikings territory in a game that took place in London, and they decided to go for it on 4th and 2 rather than kick the field goal.
Okay, but where were they on the field?
They were right about the 20-yard line-ish.
Okay, that's important.
Yeah. So context matters, right? So we know, so relatively short field goal. Not an extreme. I couldn't kick that field goal. I mean,
I could.
You could kick it.
I can do 40. Yeah.
Awesome.
Next time I see you, I'll wager you on that.
Perfect.
And I'll do it with a Canadian football that's bigger and heavier.
Now you're just showing off. Why is the Canadian football bigger and heavier?
Look, this is an hour-long podcast. We don't, and you also get points in Canada for missing field goals.
So, how do you get a point for missing a field goal?
Well, so the field goal uprates are at the front of the end zone like they used to be in America. We still play the dangerous way. You can run into them. Yeah. And what happens is that if you miss, if it goes out the back of the end zone, and bear in mind the end zone is 20 yards long instead of 10, you get a single point for a touchback. And so touchbacks are worth a point in Canada. And what ends up happening is that if the field goal is missed, the ball is still in play if it landed in the end zone. And there's a kick returner back there that can either choose to concede a touchback by taking the knee, just like in the States, or they can try to run out of the end zone. But if they concede the touchback, you get a point. And I have seen teams win games on missed field goals.
So I'm going to have a little bit more fun with this podcast, even though the focus is on leadership. Here's where vocabulary really is important, which ultimately impacts ability to communicate. So if Tim is talking about football and I'm talking about football, are we talking about football in London, which is what happened over the weekend? That was actually not global football. It was American football in London, played with a completely different ball, with a completely different set of rules. Or are we talking about football here in the States or football in Canada? Again, new set of rules, different set of instruments, different things that you are going to do in that operating environment. So sometimes we as leaders get ourselves into situations where we're attempting to move forward, but we're using different language. And if we're using different language, we're going to confuse people. We're going to lose on this communication piece. And ultimately, some people are going to make poor decisions because they think they're operating in a different environment than what the reality is, because, shocking, somebody made an assumption that when we were talking about football, we were talking about football.
Well, we were just slight differences. That's all. You're good.
So Jets decide not to kick the field goal. If they kick the field goal, even if Minnesota scores again, it's still a 1-score lead that Minnesota has. By not kicking the field goal and going into a situation where Minnesota scores again, the Jets are chasing a 2-score deficit. They're chasing a 2-score deficit, which starts to change the way that they play the game. If the identity of your team is we've got a very strong defense and we're going to force teams to score on us and we think we're going to stop you and we think we're going to be able to put up enough points to beat you, you take advantage of any opportunity you have to score points. And I think at that point in time, it just showed a failure to lead, failure to make an effective decision that aligned with the identity of the team. And what will end up happening inside your organizations is a lot of times your people will be out there in an operating environment working alone. They might be working on an electrical pole, or they might be working on a pipeline, or they might be working in some outside environment. They may not understand the identity of the organization, have guiding principles to use to make decisions, and ultimately make a wrong decision. But imagine if the identity was clear, your principles were clear, your decision-making criteria were clear, the frameworks around problem solving were clear. Imagine what kind of decisions could be made in the field, and how could your people be in a position where they actually lead self better. They lead self well.
Absolutely. What if, right? And I've worked in, and I'm sure you have too. I've worked in places that do that better than others. And we could talk all day about how and why, but you're right. What if? What if people did have the tools to lead themselves better? And where would it go, right? What if?
Like, how would people feel inside the organization if they felt like they had a little bit of an autonomy? They didn't have
Oh,
to go back and ask if they could lock the door
yeah,
or close the door or open the door or do any of those things in a restaurant environment where things are getting a little bit hot or things are getting a little bit cool. They don't have the ability to make decisions in the field. What happens if they do have the ability to make decisions in the field? Do they start to feel more valued? Do they start to
absolutely.
feel more empowered? Do they start to
Totally.
feel enabled?
Well, it's so exactly. It's like, so it's all and trusted, right? And
Yeah.
so, okay, so there's all these things that people feel. And then the question that I'll get next from people will be, so why do I care if they feel happy about themselves, right? Or simple. It's because when they're empowered, when they're enabled, when they are trusted, right, to move forward, then what ends up happening is that they do. The results are there for your business. That's why it matters for you as a leader to try to work every day at creating that environment and getting better at it every single day. It isn't just about making people feel good about themselves. This is about, by doing that, you've unlocked results for them. You've unlocked their ability to act on your behalf. You've unlocked their ability to get things done for you and have more hands, available to you while still being on brand, right? Like if you've created the right parameters and the right guidance and the right tools around autonomous decision making, then what you've done is you've allowed people to be your brand for you. I saw it. I've seen places that do it great. I've seen places that don't do it great. I would tell you that my experience 22 years ago working at Disney was probably one of the best places where I've seen it done, because I had the autonomy to do what I need to do to make the guest happy. And yet, what's the one thing about Disney? A lot of people think you don't have autonomy because they have a brand that's consistent, so they think it's tightly controlled. It's not. You're tightly empowered, right? You're
What were the
tightly
keys
empowered.
to decision making?
Like the keys. Well, do you want to talk about the literal 4 keys that they have? Because you know them.
That's why I
But I
asked
mean,
the question, Tim. Come on, this is my
it,
first rodeo.
hey, I
What are the
don't want
keys?
our
How
my point is you
and what
want your
was and
listeners to
why
learn how to
is the order important? So go through and just lay
sure.
out
Let's
the
do that.
keys and why the order is important.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I mean, let's give a little context here first, right? So
No context.
I have to give context
Why?
because I think it's important that people know that I have worked in many different organizations. And the one that I have worked in where I was most allowed to be an individual was also the one that most people would associate with having high consistent standards. And that a lot of people would think you can't be an individual in. But the reason, and this is why the keys are important, they what Disney is particularly good at is using standards as a way of empowering you, not controlling you. And so let's get into that. So basically, what Mike has asked before is what are the 4 Disney keys? And so the way it works at Disney is it says, look, when you make a decision, we want you to filter it through 4 criteria in this priority order. I might not make the same exact decision or use those tools the same way or process it the same way that you do or process, depending on where you live. But but if you can demonstrate to me that you use these four keys, then I'm good, as long as you use them responsibly and in good faith. So the first one is safety, right? Whenever faced with a decision, it's a specific thing that you haven't had maybe training on or haven't seen before. The first thing you need to consider is people's safety. Well, why is that number one? Well, simple. If you don't have a safe environment, people aren't coming, right? They're just not coming. So is the decision you're about to make safe? The second key is courtesy. Everybody knows the Disney company for their customer service. You go to a Disney park in Disney World, California, Paris, wherever, anywhere around the world, their hospitality, that's what they're known for. It's what their reputation is built on. It's world class, best customer service in the world. A lot of people would think that that would mean courtesy goes number one, but if I'm nice as pie to you and you get hurt or killed, what's it worth, right? We got to be safe. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a way that you can be safe and courteous at the same time, but it's safety, then it's courtesy. The third key is show. Now, show is a term that a lot of people who have not worked for the Disney company will not know or understand what it means. But at the Disney company, especially at the parks, every single person is part of the show. I was not called an employee, I was called a cast member because I was part of the show. It was a piece of theater, basically, right? Because we're creating environments where people feel like they have been transformed elsewhere or into a show. So the third thing you need to consider is whether or not your your decision contributes to the show or not, or is it detracting from the show? Fourth is efficiency, right? And what I always like to tell people is this doesn't mean efficiency is not important. Like, what is it if it's the last one that they listen? No, no, no. There's hundreds of things they could have listed, and efficiency still ends up number four on their list, and they stop there so that way they don't confuse the heck out of you with a million things to remember. Efficiency is very important, but efficiency of the four of them is last because if efficiency, if it's efficient, but you're taking away from the show, then you've ruined people's vacation because that's what they come for. If you're efficient, but you weren't very courteous about it, or you didn't consider, what other people might need or what they wanted, then what was it worth, right? Like if you could be efficient just for your own benefit, but it doesn't really, but it detracts from the guest experience. And so what was the point? And if you're efficient, I think it's pretty obvious. Most people would agree. I think everybody would agree. If you are efficient and sacrifice people's safety, well, then that was not a good idea. And so that's the order. It's safety, courtesy, show, and efficiency, right? And and basically the reason why you can still be an individual is because I might make lots of individual decisions around that, but I was empowered with what are your expectations, right? And because of that, Disney could rely on me and trust me to make decisions in their best interest, all geared towards the mission of giving every guest the best vacation of their lives, right? And this brings me to another point where I see a lot of leaders fall short is they judge things that other people do and nitpick at them and say, well, I would not have done it that way. Well, you don't really know that. It's easy for you to say now that the event is over. You don't know that. And they get caught up in preference over principle. I don't, people who listen to Donald Miller, you've had Donald Miller on the show, haven't you?
I have. Yep.
Yeah, so Donald Miller often says the biggest thing you can do from a time management perspective as a leader is focus on principle over preference. So what that means is, did what you did fall within our principles? And if I'm objecting to it, is it because you violated our principles in some way? Or is it just an issue of preference where I just might have executed them differently? Only address matters of principle, right? Otherwise, you're going to go crazy. You're going to micromanage everything that everybody does. So, long story long, Disney manages themselves that way. Here's your four keys: safety, courtesy, show, and efficiency. Put your decisions through those filters in that order. Is this decision safe? How can I do this courteously? Does this support the show? And is it efficient for the guest? Is it improving the guest experience from an efficiency perspective? And then let your people execute those principles and pay attention to whether or not they're focused on those principles, and don't over focus on differences of execution or preference. Because the other thing about that too is that in order to succeed, you need diverse lines of thought. You need diverse ways of doing things because your customers don't all think like you either. And so by having other people around you who might execute those principles a little differently will help you understand the different demographics of people that will walk through your doors. It's a really
So
long answer.
yeah, so and thanks for walking through it, Tim. A couple of things that you had said. One, I mean, when you started out, it was this whole idea of by understanding the standard and understanding the operating rules that you're able to work through, you could be much more creative in the way that you do your work. You could be creative, you could innovate, you could make it your own as you go through, as long as you operate within these guidelines or guideposts, or what I like to call guiding principles in the way that we operate from an organization perspective. And we prioritize things. So for Disney, it's safety, it is courtesy, it is show, it is efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
For one of the organizations I work with, it is safety, it is employee experience, it is customer experience, it is excellence. Those are there for me, relative to my organization and how, and I've shared these from a guiding principle perspective, it's understanding customer better than they understand themselves. These are a little bit longer than some of the other ones that are out there. The single words are really interesting because they're easy to remember. Mine are a little bit longer, but it's understand the customer better than they understand themselves. The second one is put the solution in the context of what's most important to the customer. The third
Mm-hmm.
one is don't limit yourself based on preconceived notions. Don't make assumptions. The fourth one is don't or set expectations and execute flawlessly. And then the fifth one is one that I added a little bit later, which is don't make our problems the customer's problem. So if any decision is made out in the field and we go through each of those criteria and all of them kind of make sense, they were all evaluated as part of the decision making process, then I feel very comfortable with the decisions that are made. Now, what we can do, like Tim had talked about, is we can evaluate results, we can evaluate performance, we can evaluate effectiveness, we can evaluate interpretation, and then we can either adjust the principle or adjust the order or add a new one in when it makes sense to do so. If we're not getting to the results or creating the operating environment, the culture that we want. And that culture, from my perspective, is how we do what we do. So leadership, how we move forward, culture, how we do what we do. Super simple definitions.
Here's a question for you. That one organization that used excellence as their fourth key, how do they define that? Because that's pretty, if I may say, that's a very abstract one. Like when I think safety, okay, courtesy, I can figure that out. Show, hey, if you're not Disney insider, you need to have that explained. Efficiency, I think people understand that. Excellence can mean a lot of things. And I'm not necessarily saying they're wrong or it's wrong. I just want to hear how they contextualize it or what they did with it.
Yeah, so I don't know the specific around what their definition is. So I can't go off the cuff and say here this is how their definition is, this is what their definition of it is of excellence. My definition and understanding based on working with them is there is nobody better at doing the work that we do inside the operating environment that we work within. So we are the best. We are the best from a design perspective. We are the best from a quality of work perspective. We are the best from an efficiency perspective. You know that if you work with us, the job will get done right.
Hmm.
The job will get done right, and you will not have to redo the job. We have so much experience in the space, the area that we're experts in, that we will anticipate the challenges that you are not aware of, those blind spots, the things that will come up in an operating environment before you even get into that operating environment. And that's how I look at excellence in the context of what we do inside that organization.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, I was just curious because like I'm sure you could see like that could mean a lot of things, right?
well, and one of the cool things about it, this is where I think that creativity comes in. So that excellence is at the end. Well, excellence from whose perspective? Excellence from the employee perspective or the customer perspective. Remember, we put the employee first, but then
Yeah.
we've got the customer in there. So employee experience, customer experience, then excellence. So we should be considering everybody's perspective in that excellence. It's this quality of work. What do we do? How do we bring ourselves in? How do we tie our shoes? What uniform are we wearing? How do we document? How do we share? Yeah. So that's how I look at that. I think one of the challenges though that I see out there that go beyond the definitions of what these words are is that there are organizations out there who don't even have the words.
Oh, agreed. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, you're much better off having this conversation to clarify what the words mean than having nothing.
Yeah.
Because if you have nothing, it means you have nothing, no clarity. Your people are constantly not sure what to do. Yeah.
And
And go ahead.
yeah, so if they're not sure what to do, how do they move forward?
They don't. And the thing is too, is that like they don't. They come, they ask you for direction, or and they feel frustrated. And the thing is too, is like I'm sure you and I have been to many of organizations that all have some sort of core values. But the problem with core values is that they're not as directive as saying, this is how you frame your decisions, right?
Right.
It's just we will be this. And I actually think that the concept of core values has become so noisy and everybody does them meaninglessly now that I think we need to move on to things like keys, or that's the next evolution, something that's a little bit more prescriptive while still
Yeah.
allowing freedom for people to act within them, because it's just become overdone, right? It's overdone and it's just noise. And now, and let's get real, because it became the thing to do, a lot of organizations are just doing them to do the thing that is to do, and they don't really mean them. And so people that are really deliberately thinking about it and they mean it, they're coming up with different ways to communicate and enable people to make decisions that are more effective as a result of the concept and the idea of core values getting watered down by disingenuous actors, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and that, this will be one of those things. And Tim and I are going to do this more frequently because we're working together on something that I think is super interesting, which gets into this whole idea of how do we expose more organizations, depending on which side of the equation you're on, what to things like fractional leadership and how a fractional leader can help you inside your organization move forward faster and build capability, long-term capability inside your organization where you are not necessarily going to fall into the trap and challenge of longer extended hiring processes, people who are going to be inside an planning on being inside an organization for a much longer period. You can bring in an expert, someone who has a specific set of skills in a specific operating environment that can help your team do the things they want to do better and faster. One of the things that we may want to get into in a future discussion is the difference between core values or values and principles.
Yeah.
And there's a distinct difference there. We'll lay some suspense out there. And if you're interested in that part of the conversation, or you have some feedback on what the difference is between values and principles, share it in the comments when you let us know that you listened to the podcast. So we've gone kind of on an interesting arc here. We talked about, well, the challenge the Jets had earlier today, where a head coach, a leader, was removed from their position. And we went through some definitions around what leadership is, what does it mean to lead. We've agreed that leadership is, well, I'll use my definition, how we move forward. We agreed that it's about movement, it's about forward momentum, it's about making progress, it's about moving along. As part of that, we talked a little bit about communication and we talked a little bit about decision making, both at an individual level, leveraging the four keys from a Disney perspective, or the principles from a client that I shared perspective. When we have these things in place, we will get ourselves into a position where your team is going to be more comfortable pushing back if leaders inside the organization are doing things that don't align with those principles or those keys. And sometimes we cut corners as leaders. Like, I might think that it's really safe for me to do something because of my athletic ability that it is not safe for somebody else to do. And I say that tongue in cheek because I still have damage that I did to my VMO, which is one of the muscles in your leg, from skipping some steps back when I worked at UPS way back when and did think something that was not safe. You can create some damage because you think that your skills are a little bit better than others. So take the opportunity to give your team space to provide feedback and communicate effectively with each other and call you out or challenge you when they see something that doesn't align with what the expectations are, because we as leaders get better together. Tim, any thoughts? How would anything that we didn't get into in this conversation that we probably should? I mean, we talked a bit about leadership. We mentioned the fractional piece. Anything else that we should get into?
I think you've mostly covered it, because I mean we could be here, and this is a huge topic that people spent centuries, millennia figuring out. But no, like I think, if we're thinking from a perspective of what does leadership and what does it mean, I that is it. Like, is what are you doing to move forward? Really, at the end of the day, because even if you look at, what I had originally was getting at with everybody's got to lead and if some people do and some people don't, well, that isn't that kind of humanity, isn't that kind of life? Some people move forward and some people don't, and who's doing what. You can tell who's moving forward and who's not, and that really is what leadership is all about. Even if we're talking about it from a perspective of everybody in an organization has to lead, and then what are some keys that people can use to make leadership decisions and to move forward. The reality is that leadership, the reason why it encapsulates every single person and not just certain positions on an organizational chart, like a lot of people traditionally believe it does, is because it's about forward movement. Right. Everybody's got to be a leader, because if everybody's not moving the ball forward, then you're not moving. Right. You're not moving the way you need to be or should be, as an organization or as a group of people or as a family or as an individual, you name it. Right.
Yeah, and imagine an environment where you're building better leaders from the front line, where you're
Mm-hmm.
building better leaders at the end point inside your organization by helping them with decision making, having 4 keys or having specific principles or having whatever it is that you want to use as criteria, where everybody knows, hey, this is the criteria we use and this is the order that we do it in. What happens when that next leadership position opens up inside an organization and you've got a bunch of people that are out there who are really good leaders of self? Now you have people who are in a better position to lead another person and then potentially lead teams and then maybe even lead teams of teams. Unfortunately, in many of the organizations that I've seen and have been around and have worked with, there is a lack of leadership. And
Mm-hmm.
that lack of leadership comes from an inability to lead self and struggles with that problem solving, decision making, goal setting and execution and communication. And I firmly believe, and this is part of my mission, that we can get better by helping others, helping ourselves be better leaders and helping those around us be better leaders, both in the context of what Tim described, which is business, how we make money, family, the people close to us, and self. Tim, awesome conversation. Where can people find more about what you're working on?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And yeah, totally awesome conversation. Not even after having to talk about both Jets teams, but no, you can find me on my website is bestculturesolutions.ca, because I mean that's what we're all about, is enabling, having people and HR strategies and processes and recruiting people that are going to be leaders, that are going to move the ball forward for you, and creating an environment that empowers and enables that. So our company is Best Culture Solutions. Our website is bestculturesolutions.ca. My email address is tim@bestculturesolutions.ca.
Perfect. And if you know of somebody who would find value in this podcast, please share it with them. Let Tim and I know via social channels. We're both active on LinkedIn, a little bit active on Instagram, active on Twitter as well. If you know somebody who'd find this valuable, please share it with them. In the context of Learn, Think, Act, just a couple of things as we close out. Number one, hopefully you've learned a bit about what leadership is, what it means to lead, and some things that you can put in place to help you and your teams, and the people that you know, lead better. Maybe even start with self, figure out how you test these things, evaluate your own specific values and principles, decision-making criteria. From a reflection standpoint, I'd like you to think about how you might apply something like guiding principles or core values to your leadership journey. Think about principles and values that you might apply to helping yourself lead better, how that might apply. And then from an action standpoint, if you are struggling with leadership inside your organization, either at the front line or at an executive level, you've lost somebody inside the organization because they've taken on another role someplace else, or you maybe have the wrong person in the wrong seat inside your organization and they need to be empowered and enabled to perform better, contact Tim and I. We've got something we're working on together where we can help. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking different about your process?